It means a great deal, I have to say that, because first of all we need to be able to communicate. And when many of the children come to this school, they can't communicate. Many of the parents can't communicate with us. And they come with anxieties, with concerns, with different cultures. They come with themselves being a little bit worried. Some of the children come at 7 who've never been to school before or been previously to school, maybe a nursery group. And they begin very much anxiety levels. And so what happens is we have to get over that. And of course, if I don't speak the language, which I don't, we need somebody to be able to communicate for us. Sometimes we do have parents who will come in with them and will help and guide them, but that's not always possible. So it's useful to have somebody like the bilingual assistant who can talk to them, can reassure them. And I think that's the word, reassurance, because when they themselves are being reassured that they're being welcomed here, that the standard of education that they're going to have is important and of a good level, that they themselves are going to be treated like any of the other children that come into school, then they will be reassured. They themselves can then settle into the community, and they themselves then can be part of the community in which they've joined, knowing that they're being treated like everybody else wherever they are, whether English or from abroad. I think the other thing,
as far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely vital.
It means working with children whose mother tongue is different than their host tongue and helping them improve their command of their own tongue.
I think it also means helping them to feel at home here, that both languages have an equal value, and that although they're not speaking their natural mother tongue now, that is still valued by us.
Acknowledging the children's culture seems to be crucial. We all need a sense of belonging, and by reinforcing the children's home culture, you give it value. There's also a lot of research that supports the thesis that if you become strong in your mother tongue, it helps you develop the host tongue.
In a school that's this size, which is nearly 800 girls in the age to 11 to 16, anybody coming into the school from another culture, be it Portugal or any other country, needs some kind of introduction to our systems, to our ways, to how we're working in this school. And the kind of support that we've been having has helped enormously the girls that we have here settle into the school and be able to take part in school life. It means for them that where they're getting complete immersion in the English language, there is someone who can help them understand what it is that we're doing. And that's particularly important for young girls coming in. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is it allows them to take pride in their own culture. It allows them, as Portuguese girls, to still reflect on what it means to be Portuguese and to be proud of that and to be able to compare the two. And that gives them confidence. And because they have confidence in their own culture, then they can take on ours and work in our culture as well. So I think that's
bilingual support in our context is beneficial for a number of reasons. The main reason is that it has improved communication between our school and children of European origin. For example, in the case of 8 of our families who are from Madeira, there are at times problems in gaining good links between home and school. For example, you will recall that in one particular case, both parents were unable to speak English, and through your mediation, we were able to improve communication in that case. That also extends to all our families, because although some parents have English partners, very often Portuguese is the language spoken in the home. So it's very important that we have increased and better communication so that we can have improved support from parents. In addition to that, there are times here in school, through the support given by yourself in this instance, has improved communication between the pupil and the teacher, because sometimes the pupil is more ready to speak to you openly than they are to the teacher. Furthermore, in our case, the children enjoy the link that you have, and they enjoy the kudos it gives them that somebody is coming in from outside to teach them not only Portuguese but also alongside that English. I think those are the main reasons.
Hola. Hello. Hello. Hola. Hello.
Hello, my name is Peter Hoffman. I'm the manager of the English as an Additional Language Service, and we operate in Poole, Bournemouth and Dorset. We've had José Pinheiro with us as our bilingual assistant for quite a long while now, and we feel that it has been a great benefit, especially when pupils arrive in school with perhaps little or no English, and they can be upset, disturbed, and it is very valuable then when José can speak to them in their home language, reassure them, visit the families to explain background information about the schools and British educational system and so on. That's one very important aspect. But of course it doesn't stop there. Then of course when the pupils have been in school for some time, they have to be able to access the British national curriculum. And there again, José has been very useful to us because he is able to explain difficult tasks to them in Portuguese so that they can then successfully complete any tasks that they couldn't have done otherwise. And also, of course, another very important thing is helping pupils to maintain their links with Portuguese language and culture, because sometimes when children arrive in Britain, they become totally immersed in British way of life.
Well, for us in this school, we have 591 children. 10% of those are from other ethnic origins and other countries. Now that isn't a large proportion, but it's quite a significant minority. And a number of those children do have language difficulties. We have 3 really. Some come in straight away from other countries with no English whatsoever, and they need support to get their spoken English going as quickly as possible. Others are families that have lived here for a long time, and although the children have street English and can make themselves understood, we've actually found that because it's not their mother tongue, it's not the language that's spoken at home, they have quite a lot of difficulty in acquiring written English and in accessing the curriculum as they grow older. So we're looking for support in both of those areas.
It helps us understand how the different cultures and the different children need support. And we don't understand in England how different cultures live and the way the families work. So we need people like yourself to actually come in and explain the way that they live and what they expect from us and what we expect from them.
In my job as an educational psychologist, I come into contact with children of all ages, from all cultures, and through my work in Bournemouth and in Leicester, I have met many families and children where bilingual support assistance and support resources have been crucial in making links with these families. I think they are an important resource to the community as well as to schools specifically.
Well, I think there are 2 aspects to bilingual support. I think First of all, it acts as a point of contact between home and school on behalf of the pupil, where the team doesn't have those language skills. So, for example, when a child arrives new into the school, bilingual support can offer translation and interpretation of very important information, which goes both ways. On the one hand, it means that we can actually ask families and parents what experience of school the child has had, whether or not they're literate in their first language, how successful they were in school, whether they enjoyed school, how long they've been at school, were they regular attenders, have they had any previous experience of English, what their interests are, who their brothers and sisters are, just general information, which obviously without language skills in that first language, we really would find it very difficult to find out. So it's collecting, gives us an opportunity to collect very important background information.
Where do you think there is a need for a bilingual assistant? And can you highlight the most of it by giving some important case studies that you have experienced in this school?
I suppose ideally, if the money was available, we'd like a bilingual support teacher seconded to us all the time just to the school. Because with the number of girls that we've got, this would help enormously. Where can I give examples? Let me talk about a girl, the most recent Portuguese girl that came to the school. Here's a girl nearly at school leaving age, suddenly thrust into our system. It was quite apparent that she couldn't enter into examination classes because it would have been inappropriate. She wouldn't have been able to access the language, and where the girls were mainly doing revision leading up to the public examinations, there wouldn't have been the opportunity for her to develop her language skills. The bilingual support assistant here was absolutely vital in helping us to chase her records to find out what had happened, in helping us to understand how she'd accessed the Portuguese school system, what had happened to her, where she'd been and why it had happened, and to help her explain to us exactly where she was at and what had occurred. And if you can understand then that it turned out that this child had had a tragic accident, that she was getting considerable pain from headaches, that she had, because of the accident and because of the problems, experienced severe learning difficulties, and that we had to make very special provision for her. None of this would have come out if we hadn't had the support of the bilingual assistant, who not only was able to talk to the girl, but was able to talk to the people necessary in order for us to get her record. I think that
when Jay first came to visit our school, and I can remember he kissed me on both cheeks. The girls were absolutely flabbergasted. They sat there and they thought, who is this man? and now they just accept Mr. Jay as a member of staff, and they will talk to him, and it is lovely. It is really lovely. Just like the Portuguese are blended more and more into our school. And that has been as a result of the help that we've had from the English as a second language service and from Jay himself.
It's vital to have a bilingual assistant because you need to make sure that you know the whole of the family history, whether there's any need for income support, family credit, and for the necessary forms to be given to the pupil or parents so that they can claim for free uniforms or whatever. So it is vital to have a backup for translation.
In most of the cases we've had in our school, I'd say that they could claim for outside things such as uniform and so on. If we didn't know that they could claim that, and they don't know, they'd be stuck.
Yeah.
For example, I had the case with Deborah with transport.
That's right.
She could actually have a taxi to school, which was paid for by the authorities and her brothers and sisters in the other school, but they wouldn't know how to go about claiming that, would they? Unless actually physically somebody here helped them. I expect it's the same with you with
school dinners. Yeah, same thing. You need somebody that can translate because we can't ask the children.
No.
to translate and fill the forms in for them.
I think it's absolutely crucial to be able to have, if you like, almost a translation system where the standard letters we send out for school. I mean, for example, a silly thing like the behaviour policy that went out recently. The Nuno
don't understand any of it.
Absolutely nothing. The letter is standard to all the children. I've got to take it home, but Nuno couldn't reply.
No.
I didn't know how to get the reply unless it was translated by somebody.
I'd like to mention some very specific examples of how José has helped us in the work of our service. One way has been in the translation of school documents. Often letters go home and the parents are unable to understand the technical language involved. And also there have been other various documents, for example, children's policy documents and other letters between parents and the school where communication has been difficult, and José has translated these on quite a large number of occasions and very effectively too. Another area where I feel that he's made an especial contribution, I'd like to highlight this one, that is in terms of liaison with families. It is an area in which he is particularly well qualified, and we have had some difficulties in the past, for example with school attendance. There was one example which I'd like to mention, which was a quite tricky personal one, and that was a case where a Portuguese pupil had been, shall we say, accused of excessive physical contact with other pupils. José was able to involve the family in meeting with the school in order to air the particular issues that had been raised. He handled it tactfully, he translated between the school and the parents and enabled a resolution of the issues to occur.
I think the other thing is that I think it's essential that we have aides in the classroom. That for these children who come, they learn through observation. The children themselves are going to be frightened, they're going to be nervous, and they themselves will learn through talking, by watching. But they talk in their own language and the children can't communicate with them. Sometimes they need a little bit of help. The teacher will need some help so they actually can practically partake in what's happening in the classroom, and they themselves can relax and they themselves can enjoy what they're doing, and so therefore the learning process can go ahead. The other area I think is translation of letters, being able to translate letters to parents, being able to communicate for them for sickness, for example medicals and things like this, if we want to set up interviews with the teachers, so that therefore they have somebody they can go to and relate to and ask questions of, and reassure them again that what is happening is not just for them, the need to be anxious is something that goes on for all the children in the school. And I think also the other important issue is meetings, open forums with parents, so that we can actually meet with Mr. Pinheiro in this particular case, with the bilingual assistant. We can meet together in a little forum, we can discuss, they can ask questions which to me may be irrelevant because I've been in the system for so long that I've begun to accept them as being the norm. But to those parents, they are important issues, and it's right that we address them and we talk about them and we discuss them, and so therefore they themselves can then take it back to their own community and can share those ideas with their friends. And then the other issue is classes for English parents, or for English for the parents of those who don't speak the language. And that's been a super asset, I think, this year, that Mr. Pinheiro is being able to talk to those parents in their own language and yet teach them English, so that they themselves feel a part of this community and part of the school, and they themselves are not so anxious, and they can share them with their children as they learn the English as an additional language.
I think probably the best example I could give of the importance of the communication between the host community, the school, and the new community was at my last school, which was in South London, in Lewisham, and there was a growing Turkish population. We had a number of Turkish children in school, and particularly boys, whose behaviour was becoming a matter of very real concern. And we spoke to the parents of those boys. Many of the younger ones, the parents that is, could speak good English, but it didn't seem to be working. And the deputy head and I actually went and visited one of the fathers, who was an older father, and started talking about the whole business of what it was like being Turkish in Lewisham. And all sorts of things came out. The younger people there, the younger parents, were saying they were English, wanted to be English, did not want to know about their host culture, they wanted to be English. All the parents were saying, no, it's really important that we preserve our culture. We must work at preserving our culture. And we spent a long, long time talking about that. The upshot of that is that we arranged a Turkish evening in school, and the Turkish community came in and provided a feast of Turkish food and had Turkish dancing, and everyone was invited, not just the Turkish community, but the community in general were invited in. And from that moment on, those boys were no problem. It actually solved the problem in school because it gave recognition to them that they were important. And an interesting other offshoot is that Turkish children started talking Turkish to one another in the playground and didn't feel self-conscious about it. And the whole dynamism of that reached out beyond the Turkish community, and we had a large Afro-Caribbean community. That though there was no language difference, there was major cultural differences, and that led to us doing a similar thing with Afro-Caribbean families.
We also had a recent case situation where there were potential areas of misunderstanding that could have developed, certainly in terms of the parents understanding what the school was offering and the religious issues that the family wanted to convey to the school. That was particularly important for this parent that we were working with, and without the bilingual support teacher available to help clarify these points and facilitate that communication, I would anticipate we would have had some real problems and misunderstandings developing. So I think bilingual support resources are crucial to help both parties understand the cultural background, the religious background from which people are speaking from, and to try and help accommodate to each other's needs.
Okay.
A very good example that we have of a Portuguese family in particular was we had a new little boy with Portuguese speaking mother and father with no English, and they came to school and came with an English girlfriend who could speak Portuguese to translate for us. And for the first 2 or 3 days he was very quiet, and in the playground would start to fight, and he thought the way I communicate is to call children and fight. And I sent a letter home to the family's friend who spoke English to say, please could you bring the parents in to school, we would like to talk to them. And it was translated, and I said, it's not you that I'm criticising, he's not a bad boy, but we don't actually behave like this in school. And the father was very, very sad because he thought I was very critical of him, and I had to translate and say no, and if he could help us and we could work together. And this particular friend translated, and the next day the boy came in very well behaved and tried more to communicate in speaking some language. And the father was very, very tearful and very sad, but it became right in the end.
One particular difficulty that we sometimes have is determining whether or not a child is having learning difficulties, or whether it's simply the fact that English isn't their first language. And I can think of an example where I'm working with a child who I feel may have some speech difficulties, and I'm considering referring him, and the school is considering referring him to a speech therapist. And I suspect that he actually has difficulties with speech which are not necessarily associated with Portuguese. And so I can approach the bilingual assistant and say, when you've spoken to him in Portuguese, have you noticed anything strange or unusual about his speech patterns in Portuguese? Does he have difficulties with sounds that most Portuguese children don't have difficulties with? If you're working with the child, have you noticed, in another example, I can think of a situation where I felt that the child had learning difficulties and was a slow learner. And if that child is also working in the Portuguese lessons, then the observations which the bilingual assistant makes can be useful to us in building up a profile of the child in very general terms. And that is one of the areas that we're currently looking at, is trying to screen, if you like, difficulties arising specifically from English being a second language and learning difficulties. We've also had children that have got behavioural problems. Now we don't know, sometimes there's a situation where they were having behavioural problems in their schools, in this case Madeira, or is it simply that the child is having behavioural problems because they're just finding it difficult to settle, in which case it may be a temporary problem, or is it something more serious that was evident in their school in Madeira or in Portugal? So it's really, again, trying to get an overall context. We're working with children, we're trying to look at their learning in general, and it's a question of sometimes separating the difficulties that they're having with English or the difficulties that they're having with learning generally. And it's very important to make sure that we're addressing the right problems and the right difficulties.
What is your name? I am English. I am English. Eu sou português. Como? What is your name? Como é que te chamas? Como te chamas? What's your name? Eu aprendo português e inglês. Eu aprendo português e inglês. I learn Portuguese and English. Eu aprendo português e inglês. I learn Portuguese and English. Portugal, Madeira, Açores, Brasil, Guiné, Moçambique, Angola, Cabo Verde, São Tomé. I am bilingual. I am bilingual. I am bilingual. I learn Portuguese and English. I speak 2 languages. Portugal, Madeira, Açores, Brasil, Guiné, Moçambique, Angola, Cabo Verde, São Tomé.
Lastly, I'd like to say how impressed I am with this booklet. Here it is. I won't attempt to pronounce it. And obviously it's written in Portuguese, but also in French and in English. And it's obviously very helpful for anybody that likes to know about Portuguese language and culture. And indeed, a lot of people in the British education system are not aware that the Portuguese consulate is almost unique in providing support for its own pupils. I only wish that other countries had the same will and were willing to support that will with actual financial support for these bilingual assistants. And we're therefore particularly appreciative of the help that has been given. And of course, on a broader perspective, it's important to remember that, of course, not just for Portuguese pupils, but the presence of bilingual assistants is yet another step in our move towards a multicultural society and our vision of a society without divisions of race and so on. Of course.
I'm fascinated with the number. I had no knowledge that it was as broad as that. And interestingly, I mean, 31 in the United Kingdom, as opposed to other countries. So other countries have got a lot more experience in dealing with this than we have.
Yes, it's an excellent leaflet. I think it's most important to retain one's own cultural background and the language, because it's so easily lost. I've seen that so often happen from children of different nationalities and languages, that they've come to this school, and in so learning English, they've forgotten their own language. And so therefore I think it's a large disappointment to their parents later they were not able to maintain it. And I think this has been a great importance, I think, to the Portuguese, that they've been able to retain and learn the language in school as well as learning English. I think it has 2 or 3 advantages. The main advantage, I think, is that when the parents take them home, when they go back to Madeira or Portugal, they can actually, the grandchildren can actually talk to their grandparents. And that's important because they may not have seen them for 2 or 3 years. And when they go back, they can be part of the family unit again. Whereas if they've forgotten their language, they themselves will seem as if they're in an alien society rather than their own roots and in their own hometowns and their own villages. And I think that's vitally important. I think it's important for the job flow within the community, that if you have this linguistic ability, the ability to be able to talk 2 or 3 or 4 languages, that you yourself has a greater potential to be employed, because you can, in this present climate, can move around Europe and be able to talk these different languages, and so you're actually thinking in terms of the future, in future of what they're going to do, both educationally and both in the job market as they get older. And I think that's important for these children as well.
One of the things that strikes me about this is what very large populations of Portuguese-speaking people there are in other European countries, or in fact throughout the world.
It had never occurred to me that there were so many. And I think it's brilliant that you do look at supporting in an organised way your communities that are in other countries. And that you support within the systems that are already there. Whereas English would perhaps set up their own schools, that you are supporting Portuguese-speaking people within the communities and within the education system.
It is a policy of integration, which is essential.
So you were not quite aware about that?
Not to the extent. I mean, it's a weakness. There'll be lots of other things that you don't tend to project beyond your own circle of knowledge. So you assume, because there are Portuguese children here, there will be Portuguese families elsewhere in England, and they probably group in specific areas. And if you think about it, it's logical that there should be others in other European countries. But I've never thought beyond those very vague assumptions. This fleshes up the assumptions, but it's the distribution that I find interesting. That there are very, very large numbers in a number of Europe. I mean, the one that stands out is France. Huge Portuguese-speaking population. And the other thing which sort of demonstrates the level of ignorance is the point you made earlier when we were chatting about your supporting Portuguese language, not children or families from Portugal. They come from the islands, they come from Brazil, they come from Portuguese-speaking parts of the world. So again, I made assumptions. I assumed that the Portuguese families we had here were from Portugal. And I could then make all sorts of erroneous assumptions about those families, which could get in the way.
Some of them, they never been to Portugal.
That's right, that's right. So, you, as a bilingual assistant, helping schools understand the families that are coming to them is a very important part, and perhaps that's a neglected part. That may simply be because of numbers. If you've only got 1 or 2, to what degree you gear up something for the needs of those 1 or 2?
It's also the knock-on effect, isn't it? You're also educating us.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah, that's really important.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think the point we're making is that the whole business of teaching a second language goes way, way beyond the mechanics of teaching a language. It has a ripple out effect, because if there's an expression of your culture, it's got to be your language. So you can't deal with language without dealing with culture.
Absolutely.
And each should enrich the other. And any enrichment of culture must be good. So everyone should gain from this, not just Portuguese families and Portuguese children, but all families and all children, if there's a sharing and recognition of the power of other people's cultures.
Mr. Martin, do you believe, because of your experience in London, for instance, and now here, that we tend to have a society where there's going to be much more foreigners around?
Going today? Yeah, I think so. And I mean, my biggest problem is I don't see it as a problem. One of my real difficulties is I can't see why you can't do it. If you're prepared to not place a value judgment every time you look at somebody, if you're prepared to find common cause, common knowledge, common aspirations, then you start then to have an exchange of views rather than a rejection of views. You start looking at similarities rather than difference. And the art, it seems to me, going back to the Turkish group, one of the things that the older parents feared is that if they became too English, they would lose their Turkishness. And they wanted to keep their Turkishness. And they said the biggest thing that they were finding was trying to balance the two. They were the people most affected by that were young women, because the Turkish people were Muslim. So they were very different. The impact on women was far greater than on men. And many of the older fathers were worried about their younger daughters, adult daughters, and the way in which they were becoming English. And some of the older mothers could not speak English because the culture didn't allow them to be in a context where they could learn English. Because the culture demanded that they remain Turkish, so they couldn't work. So the whole thing gets very complicated, but it's only by actually talking it through and balancing out those needs that you can actually move forward. And I don't see why a foreign culture needs to threaten a host culture.
At a time when boundaries are disappearing, borders are easier to cross, communications are faster, I think there are going to be far more people of every country and culture moving around.
And that's good for you.
Oh yes. And I think we're in
a rich variety.
That's right, and I think as an island nation, we've got particular problems. We're not used to border crossing. You know, foreigners start at Dover is said as a joke, but I think it's built into our cultural thinking.
We are naturally suspicious of anybody or anything different.
And everybody can speak English, can't they?
Which makes us very lazy.
That's right, and I think that's right, and I think that impacts as well.
That's right, that's right.
I think anything that can bring into us and educate the English people to relate the similarities of what we all have in common and the richness, the variety and the attractiveness of other cultures not only increases the value to us, but it also raises the self-esteem of the people who are here with us, and can only be good.
I think this type of information is crucial to do two things really. The one is to disseminate basic information about resources that are available. I think in a working environment where often services and resources are split and it's quite difficult to find out who is offering what, this type of very easily accessible, well-presented information is very useful. I also think it's crucial to encourage people to think beyond their own cultural set, to appreciate that other people do have things to offer our community, and to educate people into a broader way of thinking and an acceptance of each other.
Were you aware that those figures, for instance, I mean, there's other Portuguese teachers around, right? In
I have to
several
say,
countries,
reading this, I was surprised at the extent of the resources that are available from this particular initiative. So, no, in a way, I am very much the product of my own ignorance, and probably reflect the ignorance of other professionals who are not aware, maybe as much as they should be, of the types of resources that are available to support both adults and children across all cultures.
Would you think it would be a good idea to have different other governments doing the same?
I think that would be a fine idea.
Looking at the leaflet, the Portuguese Department of Education sends out a quite reasonable number of teachers around the world. Do you recognize our efforts to preserve our culture and our language? And would you say this is a step forward to a multicultural society?
I think it's really quite amazing and brilliant, because we get children from all over the world here. I don't know of any other country that does this, and the commitment to actually support the Portuguese nationals who are working in this country, I think is, as far as I'm aware, unique. It shows a brilliant commitment to those children, because, you know, whether they go back to their country or whether they stay, it's very important that their mother tongue is valued. We know now from linguistics that if children need to develop their mother tongue in order to develop other languages, and to keep that culture is also very important. And, you know, I think it's really to be very, very highly commended. I wish other countries would do it. I really do. Yeah, it's brilliant.
So you were not quite aware that we actually had so many teachers, that, for instance, in America and South Africa and so on?
No, I wasn't. I mean, I know when you came, you know, this seemed brilliant, and we thought it was a one-off, but to do that right through the world, I think, is really amazing, you know. I mean, I know that Portugal had a very wide base, you know, go back into history. It was one of the great empires of the world. So you've got Portuguese people going out to countries all over the world because there are roots there and the language is there. And to support those people, I think is, you know, I hope they continue and extend it, because the need is there. I mean, we're just a little tiny corner of a little tiny country, but the value that we've had from it and the support for our school, please, Portuguese government, keep going, because it's great. And
I think this is excellent. It's the first time I've seen the leaflet, but I think it is an excellent way of ensuring that the Portuguese young people don't lose their sense of identity with Portugal. And as global communication and travel becomes so much more accessible to everybody, it is important that we retain that which we think is essential to our culture. And I think it's a very good example for a small country which clearly sends people to all parts of the world, to allow all the young people to understand where they come from, their roots, really. And I would support it all the way. I think it's absolutely excellent.
But you know that it's a worldwide language, anyway.
Yes, I do. And that it's spoken, and increasing numbers of people are speaking it. I think it's going to be, what is it, the 5th most common language by the year 2000? And I think it's something that's going to continue to grow at the moment. Everybody seems to be understanding, and I think it's excellent. So I think, yes.
So looking at that leaflet, would you think that most of the teachers then will become more aware about our efforts, and besides that they'll give more respect to foreign students, I mean particularly to Portuguese students? What do you think?
I think that we can on this island be very monocultural. And I think we don't often sit back and think what it means to understand the cultures of other people. We tend to expect people to sink into our way of life. And I think that this is a wonderful way of encouraging people to respect both cultures. And I think it should be supported all the way. It really is a very, very good example of what can be done, and should be accepted as a model, I think, for probably other countries as well. Because children who come from other cultures don't have this kind of support, and you can see them lose their confidence because they don't know which culture they're coming from. It's difficult for them to have any confidence in a new one. And I think that certainly my experience is that the Portuguese children don't have that problem, that they are very secure in their own culture. And
there's been a lot of research to show that children who are bilingual generally can perform better than their peers because simply because they are operating in two languages, so they have access to a wider and richer vocabulary. So I think that supporting the language is certainly very important, not just for social reasons but also for educational, academic learning reasons. It's also not only does it benefit the students themselves, in this case the Portuguese-speaking students, but it also benefits all the children in the school because it gives them access to wider cultural awareness and diversity, which particularly in the southwest and south and southwest of England, it's not an area that has a large ethnic population. And so diversity isn't as, if you like, normal a situation here in Bournemouth and Poole as it is in some of the inner cities. So I think anything which broadens children's perspective of the world and heightens their awareness of the complexity of cultures and backgrounds, then has got to be a positive thing.
Certainly I recognise the contribution you're making. Looking at the figures here, despite our 2,000 pupils in our schools, I would hope that in the future we'll be able to increase the number of teachers available to support cultural activities within our schools. Obviously, it's nice that our children from Portuguese background and Nigerian backgrounds are given the opportunity to experience part of to have this culture recognised within the mainstream framework as well as at home.
I am bilingual. Me too. Me too. I am. Me as well.